From the First Presbyterian Church of Atlanta, I'm Ryan Bonfilio, and this is TheoEd Talks. I'm here with Dr. Gregory Ellison to do a follow-up conversation about his recent TheoEd talk that's titled, The Picture of an Activist. Dr. Ellison, it's so great to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things I wanted to start with is to give us a little bit of a broader context for your talk, because it's not just an isolated idea that you've come up with, but it's actually a part of a bigger project and a bigger thing that you're working on. I want to tell us a little bit about Fearless Dialogues and how that fits in.
Sure. So this particular talk is a very small snippet of a larger chapter, which is actually the final chapter of my forthcoming book, Fearless Dialogues, A New Movement for Justice. And that book is actually, it provides a theoretical and practical framework of the organization that I started with a group of colleagues in 2013 called Fearless Dialogues. And what we seek to do is to create unique spaces for unlikely partners to have heartfelt conversations about taboo subjects. So those taboo subjects may range from classism and racism and homophobia to how we might create spaces that we can begin to think about mission work differently. So over the past 4 years, we've worked with about 20,000 people around the globe, some of which have been gang leaders, others have been corporate gangsters, corporations, but also in churches and in community centers, thinking about how we might begin to see the people around us who are invisible and hear those who may feel as if they're voiceless and muted. And finally, how once we begin to see and hear and value the personhood of the people around us, how then can we begin to work creatively and collectively towards change? And so this talk on the picture of an activist is really helping to situate me and hopefully our readers and how they think about how they can overcome the fears of oppressive systems that say there's a very tight framework. There's only a limited way in which you can create social change.
That's wonderful. And if folks, if our viewing audience in TheoEd Talks wanted to find out more about Fearless Dialogues, where do they go? What's the best way to do that?
So you can follow us on Facebook, but we also have a website, www.fearlessdialogues.com. And if you want to kind of see some of the theoretical underpinning, as well as hear about some of the stories that have informed and shaped and grown out of this work, please feel free to pick up the book, which you can find on Amazon. Shameless plug.
That's all right. We're okay with that.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for sharing about Fearless Dialogues.
No doubt.
I wanted to ask, one of the things that was really one of the powerful moments, of the many powerful moments in your talk, was your opening. When you described that scene, you're at the federal courthouse after the police shooting of Michael Brown. And later you say you go back and you see on Facebook this picture. This picture of 3 people that you instantly recognize. I wonder if you might just say a little bit more about who those people are, not just in terms of their names, but who they are to you, and what sort of reaction that provoked in you in seeing them in that scene.
So the real crisis, Ryan, was that I was not at the Thomas Eagleton. The Thomas Eagleton courthouse. I was actually in the comforts of my home.
I see.
Here in Atlanta, Georgia, while several of my friends in the academy and ministers, as well as some of my activist-oriented colleagues, were actually in Ferguson, Missouri. And on that day, Moral Monday, August 10th of 2015, they made the trek.
I see.
Which was only 0.4 miles from Christ Cathedral Church to the Thomas Eagleton federal courthouse. But I was sitting at my desk in my office, following the feed as they made each step closer to their certain detainment that day. And it was difficult for me because as I was wrestling with my own sense of vocation, who am I? Am I a minister in this prophetic preaching tradition? Am I a public intellectual? Am I an activist? How do I reconcile these identifiers of myself when I am sitting at my desk, and my colleagues who are in their own way fighting for justice are standing before armed policemen. And so these colleagues were not just any people, as I articulate in this talk. It was my teacher, Cornell West, who, saw something in me in many ways before I could see it in myself. It was my dear friend, Reverend Starsky Wilson, who I've known for over a decade now, and who really negotiated his role as chairman of a large foundation and pastor by day, and then as supporter of these young activists who are seeking to have their voice heard before armed military police in riot gear by night. And then there was my own sister, right, standing there in her sleeveless shirt, articulating in her own voice her passions for justice. And then there was me, sitting in my office, typing on my computer, burning up from inside out, questioning, why am I here? Why am I not there? If I consider myself an activist, why am I so, why do I rarely find the picket line? If I am a public intellectual, why am I behind the scenes at my office? If I am a prophetic minister, I don't have a pulpit in which I preach. So how do I articulate my own sense of vocation, given the distance and the proximity? And so this is why this became a vocational crisis that lingered in me for not only hours, but days and weeks and months. Until, I had a major epiphany that said, this is who you are. And I believe it's important, and we'll see, as you see in this talk, it's important to define our vocation not merely by negation of who we are not, but more importantly, who are we, and who has God created us to be, and how can we uniquely utilize these gifts? I'm talking long.
No, this is good. It's a powerful word. I think for you to share your experience, I'm sure many of us have felt similar impulses. Now, maybe the context was different, or the situation was different, or we were in different places. But I think what you're naming, what you put your finger on, is something that a lot of us can understand. I wanted, though, kind of to piggyback on that, a lot of this is your discussion about vocation. And the negation of vocation, and not going that track, but really understanding who you are. I wonder if you might just say a little bit more about what is your understanding of vocation, right? Because it's more than just the job we do, our occupation. It's something other than that. But what is that other? How would you explain or articulate that part of vocation that extends beyond just our job title?
So vocation has its roots in the Latin word vocare, which means to call, right? But I also think of the word vox, which means voice. And there's so there is some voice that is calling from within us saying, this is who you are, right? But the challenge in our society is that there are also competing voices that are clamoring for our attention saying, this is who you should be. And so the tension that I am articulating in this chapter and briefly in this talk is that we are often at odds with who we are created to be and who the world says that we should be. And so I am, as I start this talk and begin this chapter, I'm thinking about, what does the world say a public intellectual should be? What does the world say a prophetic minister should do? What does it mean to be an activist? Now, given these very small, truncated views of how the world conceives that we should be, many of us try to fit ourselves within those boxes. And I think about it as I am a square peg or a circle peg trying to fit in this rectangular or square box. But over time, I began to recognize that I need to sculpt my peg and to be the most authentic me that I can. So at times when I'm involved in teaching, it may sound a bit preachy, right? When I am engaged in preaching, I often revert to my professorial voice. And then when I am engaging in the work of Fearless Dialogues, it's artistic, and
Sure.
you might see some of those activist tendencies, as well as my teaching training and the theories that are emerging in a very, down-to-earth way. And at times, we see in even secular spaces,
Sure.
Movements of the Spirit.
Yeah.
And so through the work and the wisdom of folks like Howard Thurman
Yeah.
and looking at the vocational decisions that Jesus made in his day, I came to recognize that I am not all of these things that the world says that I should be, but I am an artist.
Yeah.
I create space. I don't paint pictures, I don't sing, but I create unique spaces for
how
hard,
interesting.
heartfelt
Yeah.
conversations by utilizing my gifts in teaching and preaching and even these activist sensibilities that were ingrained in me from birth.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because you're creating a picture of vocation that enables us to tap into the various different identities, passions, feelings that we have, that we're not just one thing. We're not just a teacher or an artist or whatever it is, but that we can combine these gifts and passions and interests, these different parts of our identity that we so often have been told don't go together,
Sure.
Into something special to create space and to advance these dialogues.
And one of the pieces that I talk about is how can we reckon with Rome?
Yeah.
Right? In this particular text. And I say that Rome is the great disturber of peace, right? Because Rome is the enemy, particularly if you're a poor minority.
Right.
Rome is everywhere. And one of the challenges that we have noticed in Fearless Dialogues is that people fear oppressive systems because they think, how can my small self create change in a system that is so much larger than me?
Yeah.
Right? And so the work that we seek to do, and echoing or following in the path of Jesus, as Thurman articulates, is we seek to help people move from head to heart and to claim their own sense of unique vocation and begin to think about, how can I affect the 3 feet around me? Right? This is
We're in about that 3 feet right now.
You're within my 3 feet. I can reach out. But Ryan, I asked folks, and we've done this challenge to nearly 20,000 people around the globe. How can you see the people who cross within your 3 feet orbit? How can you hear their stories? And it doesn't take much time.
Yeah.
And in that process of seeing and hearing, how does that reorient how we move in the world? And so this work that we're seeking to do in dismantling larger systems happens in 3 feet increments. What does it mean that 20,000 people potentially have seen at least 3 people that have crossed within their orbit? What does that mean? And so in many ways, the all-encompassing empire, right, that may attack us through media, which may come to us in the ways that our children are being taught in school. How can we reclaim the inward territory by the way in which we operate and interact with the people in closest proximity to us? So that's how we go about creating change. So Ryan, as is common in Fearless Dialogues, it's important for us to create spaces for hard conversations, as you have done here. And I just think it would be really fitting, right, to end with a question of me asking you a question while you have been the interviewer.
Sure.
We have an experiment. We call our modules experiments because they're theory-based. Called the 5 hardest questions we'll face in life. I won't ask you the 5th question because it's a wingdinger, but I would like to ask you the 4th. So I'll give you the first few. The first is, who am I? Which connects deeply to what we've talked about here.
Sure.
The second is, why am I here? not necessarily why we're sitting, in this church off of
Right.
Peachtree Road, but what sacrifices have been made so that I could be here? And
Yeah.
what am I doing now
Yeah.
that I am here? The third question is, what is my gift? And far too many people, confuse their gifts with their talents.
Yeah.
But the fourth question is the one that I want to ask you. And it's one that was asked by W.E.B. Du Bois in The Souls of Black Folk. He says, how does it feel to be a problem? And I think that's a very intriguing question,
Yeah.
given our context and talking about vocation and resistance, because you have taken an alternative path to living out your vocation, right? I know that you are a trained scholar. You've gone through a doctoral program. We've intersected along the way. But now you find yourself in a church, right? And so you are seeking to navigate some very different roles for those that are necessarily prescribed for people of your skill set, right? But it seems to me that you're living this out in a very authentic way. But that creates problems for people because you don't fit within that tight box
right.
that we talked about. So my question to you, Brother Ryan, is Dr. Ryan, Reverend Ryan.
Brother is good.
How does it feel
Yeah.
to be a problem?
Yeah, that's a great question, and in general, but I specifically appreciate, with respect to my context, I feel two very different things about that problem. On the one hand, I think that that problem of me being between two very traditional vocational spheres of ministry in the church and the academy, spheres that sometimes are very separate, and I think tragically can be very separate. I can feel like I'm a stranger in both worlds, even though I'm doing both of those worlds through scholarship, through writing, through teaching seminary courses, or doing ministry here at First Pres. I'm a neighbor in both communities. I'm accepted, or at least credentialed, in both communities, but I can feel that I'm a stranger, and that I don't fit, or that the gifts, or that only half of me fits. So I feel like sometimes when I'm in the seminary world, only half of what I do matters.
Yes.
And I'm like, but wait, there's this other stuff. Or when I'm here at church, that only that half is valued. And I think, wait, no, there's this other side of who I am. And so that can create a tension, to feel that one is a stranger in both homes that I live in vocationally.
So I'm not alone.
I don't think
Right.
so.
And so the question then, which is rooted somewhere deep beneath that initial question of how does it feel to be a problem, is who am I?
Yeah.
And how will I seek to live an undivided life?
Yeah. And that's the second half for me, is that I think as much as it's a problem, it also can be a privilege.
Yeah.
And it can be an opportunity to be a different sort of voice, to bring different sensibilities and experiences and passions together into this more complicated matrix of vocation. And to me, they're the best moments, I think, of what I do, is when I get to wear a scholarly hat in the church, or when I get to bring pastoral sensitivities into the classroom. To me, that's my vocation, is to be a pastorally minded teacher and scholar. And so in a way, I think this is an authentic expression of who I am, but it doesn't mean it's always easy to be that person, or to live in that world. That's right. That's what I hope to be, at least. Yeah. Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for the conversation. We're so grateful to have you here with us.
Thank you.
Absolutely.